and call our January 30th, 2023 budget work session to order. If you will, stand with me for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And now our pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, thank you all for being here this evening. Before we go any further, we do have a backup clerk to match my backup chairmanship. So, Mr. Clerk, if you will, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Mr. Eric.
Present.
Ms. Fitzpatrick. Mr. Francis.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Littleton.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Morgan.
Yes.
Ms. Scruggs Duncan.
Present.
Mr. Wright.
All right. Thank you. And before we continue, I would like to announce the following additions to today's agenda. After item 23-163, we will have 24-164, consider approval for the HOSA field trip. And again, that's after our closed session. That would then bring us to what we're all here for. So item 23-161, our budget update. So, Ms. Alton, Ms. Johnson?
Certainly. So our finance directors are going to bring you a lot of technical information about our budget this evening, but before they begin, we just have a couple of things that we'd like to acknowledge. The first being the very, very hard work that has gone into this from a whole lot of entities. Certainly our board budget committee, as well as both our finance directors and their staffs and the rest of the staff here provided input to that. We also, just by way of information, they will speak more about this, but we want to make sure that you all are aware that regrettably there is a statewide error. It is not a local error, it is a statewide error in some of the original projections that have been given for the local school division budgets. That's affecting all school divisions right now in the Commonwealth, so that's important to acknowledge. They're going to give you really nice technical information on that, but we just want to make sure that you all hear how much we support the hard work they've been doing to try to mitigate that and understand that. They will not have a full understanding of that until at least February 9th, so that's accurate. They will certainly explain that, but we wanted you all to hear that from us as well, because that's a significant piece of the budget process. The budget that they're bringing you, the information they're bringing you, represents a ton of cooperation, a ton of hard work. We really appreciate all the effort. It is also, someone retires tomorrow.
Yay.
And that
We have cake, I heard.
So we want to very openly acknowledge Mr. Rice's contributions from the historic Alleghany County Public Schools, as well as Alleghany Highlands, and I think Mr. Eric might have something to add to that also.
Well, we certainly, anybody that has been around public education, even for the last couple, 3 years like I have, and has been fortunate enough to be around and watch Mr. Rice work, his thoroughness, his professionalism, conscientiousness. I mean, I'll come up with a few more of them here in a minute, Kevin, but I have seen that from the Joint School Services process and your willingness to help that committee work through the things that it had to work through. And of course, there were many issues that you helped us with. So I've seen it from the outside looking in and now from the inside of the organization. So I'd like to thank you for everything that you've done. It really has been top notch. And we're going to miss you, and you can still, I don't know if he can keep his key to the store, but we can work something out. If you happen to get really bored, we can help you with that.
Yes.
And there'll always be a seat here in the meeting. So.
Oh, I can't wait to come back to those.
Well, maybe if you're coming back as a pure spectator or subject matter expert, maybe it'll be a little less stressful.
I wouldn't do that to you.
Well, we certainly appreciate your contributions.
Thank you.
And we appreciate you coming back here at least one last time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And wish you well.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Melinda, did I miss anything in the end?
Just echo what everyone said, and it's a pleasure to have worked with Kevin and his efforts to combine the two school divisions' finances with Rebecca and their team has been outstanding, and we're going to miss him, but we wish him nothing but good health and happiness on his retirement.
And be thankful you have a servant. Because you bring somebody in off the street doesn't know school finance, and that's a doozy.
I just want to reiterate what people are saying. You know, Kevin's been, he'll be hard shoes to try to fill, and he's been nothing but welcoming and gracious and kind and helpful and any other adjective you can think of that's positive to me in stepping into this role. Offered to give me his office like on day one, that I'll be down here.
She thought that was being good.
Just, you know, I can't say enough good things, and he's definitely done a lot of the heavy lift on this budget thus far, particularly on the personnel side, which we all know is the major portion of the budget. And he's been great. He's been great. And
Thank you.
we've worked him, you know, down to, he's working tomorrow.
Yes.
What's that? Worked me like a four-legged mule there.
Exactly, absolutely, absolutely. And he's done it without complaint. So,
That's the fun part of the job.
I'm very, very, very indebted.
We appreciate you both very sincerely, especially with the information from earlier, because we realize this is a moving target. So thank you all so much, and we know you have a variety of information to bring to the group here. So
You want me to start with revenue maybe?
Sure.
So back in mid-December, we did receive the governor's budget. We were waiting for the House and Senate versions, which we expect to receive sometime in February, maybe by the 9th, as Kim just indicated. And the budget committee did meet, Mr. Littleton, Mrs. Fitzpatrick, and we reviewed budget requests from staff and compared that to the revenues that we expect to receive. And so the document that I handed out shows our the anticipated state revenue. And the very first thing there is basic aid, and that was 11.9 when the budget committee met in January. It's been reduced down to 11.4, and that is due to, as Kim said, a VDOE error, which we were notified of last Wednesday. We got a little more information on that error on Friday, but we still did not get a new calc tool telling what the exact amount was. We were just left to our own devices to calculate it via a formula, and I think it's right. But it was a hit. It was a huge hit. It was $414,000, and it's a pretty big hit to be notified of at the end of January, I think.
And that's why you always have a little contingency in your budget, because invariably they're going to make a mistake like that every year.
Correct. So, so when the budget committee met, we thought we had done a pretty good job of trimming some expenses, but we didn't trim enough to make up that. So anyway, the revenues there, you can see the state revenues divided into SOQ programs, incentive programs, categorical programs, and lottery funded programs. And then you see our federal and our local revenues. I'll just point out a couple of things that are pretty significant. We are receiving, the governor's budget does plan for a 5% salary increase for staff. And the state portion of that is that $1,636,243.
Which is actually 2 years' worth.
Right.
Current year and next year.
And then the current year. And then there is also a bonus payment in there of $134,000. They're calling for a 1% bonus to be given in September. I don't know if that will last in subsequent versions of the budget, but it was in the governor's budget. You also see there the $600,000 for the joint school division is in there again this year. And the Virginia Preschool Initiative, we're going to bring that program totally in-house next year, thanks to Mr. Callahan. And we have a preschool program at Judah Watson now, but next year we're going to have one at Callahan and Sharon and Mountain View. And it's only going to involve the addition of 2 new teachers and 2 teachers' aides, because we have one teacher who's our junior kindergarten person now that can switch over and become a preschool teacher. So that's good news. Um, Let me see if there's anything else. You can see all
The school
comparisons.
construction,
School construction money, it was $2 million for this year. That was with the original governor's budget, that which we based our budget on. When we got the final budget for this year, it was just a very little overall change. So we didn't go in and revise our budget, but the final budget for this year was 1.751126. And anything we don't spend this year, we can carry over into next year. So that's why that's in the budget for next year.
and we budget equivalent expenditures, so it's budget neutral. If it goes up or down, it's not going to impact the net.
So that's what we have for capital improvement? Is that what it is?
Just for
That's
that.
what we have.
So you have other categories. Before, when Alleghany County existed, we had the Fund 10, the school capital fund. All that reverted to the county back in December. So I believe the county plans to avail some of those funds for projects going forward, like to finish the track, for example, and stuff like that, which had been committed prior to. So
The
How much
county had a
was in
written
it?
agreement with the school board that any leftover funds
Right.
could stay with the school board.
Do you know
The
the
city
total?
did not have such a written agreement, and
Uh-huh.
since Alleghany County ceased to exist last year, those funds went back to the county. Now, as Kevin said, some of those funds may be in reserve for the track project, but that's something that we really, I would certainly like us to see develop for the Alleghany Highlands Public School Divisions with Covington City and Alleghany County as well. But that is not in place.
How much was given back?
over $6 million. Now, not all of it was in the school capital fund. That was all funds total. That was our operating fund, which for Alleghany County last year, you had all of the vacancies and positions that were never filled. Plus, in prior years, all the federal grant reimbursement funds and other grants, you have to spend the money and you get it back in reimbursement. So a lot of times you don't get reimbursements for the prior year until the subsequent budget year, and they just carry forward. Same with the 2-month lag in state sales tax. But because the entity was ending, instead of it carrying forward like it would have normally, that all reverted back to the county. Same would have applied to the city.
So some of those funds were simply reimbursing expenses that had incurred.
So that was a big hunk of it. And then anything that was in the school capital fund, which was approximately $3 million, I believe, off the top of my head, that reverted back, as did any residual amounts left in the new tech and the Medicaid reimbursement funds. But the thing that I reminded the county of in my letter where we returned the money was that one of the goals of having that arrangement was to ensure the efficient and responsible use of public funds. And I think the fact that we returned that money instead of spending it over the years on, let's go buy this and that at the end of the year so we don't have to give it back to the county, is indicative of the success of that program. So I hope the 2 local governments will agree to do that again for the benefit of the school
Definitely
system.
responsible and discourages unreasonable buying sprees at the end of the year, which I don't think anyone's in favor of.
And there are capital outlay funds budgeted under federal, which you'll get to in a second, under the COVID program. So that's helping pay for like the HVAC upgrades in a couple of the schools.
Plus, when we had to put a roof on, we didn't have to go to county for money.
That's right. It was right there.
We had the money. That's a big,
The full renovation of the high school, the county didn't have to pony up one dime for that. That was all done with accrued funds from the school board.
Then we have our federal revenues, that goes versus our title programs, Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV-A, B, programs like that, and also our COVID money, which is our ESSER funds, the $2,214,134, and as Kevin pointed out, there's a like expense to match. That's really for all those federal funds, there's a like expenditure that matches that exact amount for those funds. You will see there that the CTE High School Innovation Grant of $104,441. That grant will end in March of this year. So no money is budgeted for that for next year.
What about the staff that are administrating that?
She'll cover that here in just a second.
What
So
about
Sorry, I'm
what?
getting ahead.
What about what?
the staff associated with that, you're gonna cover that when you get over the
Right,
reductions.
yeah. It's still an expense. It's still an expense. That's an expense that can be considered for removal since the funding for that is going away, or will go away in March. Then you see the local funds there. We are well overmatched now, thanks to basically Alleghany County. And so this is assuming that our local funds stay the same. That's what we are hoping for. That's what I think Kim and Melinda have sent correspondence to Alan and to Reed, expressing appreciation for their matching funds and asking that they keep that those funds low.
We're not asking for an increase.
We're not asking for an increase. We're asking for level funding. So, our total revenues, you can see down the top of the third page are $47,274,742, which is an increase of just over $1 million from the current fiscal year. And then you see there all the expenditure increases that are in the projected budgets. And as I said, Kevin's done a great job of developing some salary projections for next year, and he's going to cover those. You see a cost of a bonus there, and you see staff requests for additional wish listings, as I like to call them. Some of those things were eliminated with the budget committee when we met on in early January. And then you see at the bottom some potentially deficit offsets, like elimination of Kevin's position, elimination of the supervisor of technology positions, elimination of the VPI program, which now goes to the YMCA, which we're pulling back in-house. AHA grant expenditures.
School counselor? Is that click in the middle?
Where is the school?
It's up close to the top. Addition of 1 full-time school counselor.
Oh, that's,
That was eliminated by the budget committee.
But, I mean, is that Mountain View? Is that because the school is closing?
No, that was a request. That was an additional request for next year. It's not an existing position. That was a request for a position to be added.
And then you
Every
didn't.
building administrator can request for
Right.
things, and that's what this list is, requests from.
Right.
Things.
So this is just the nose.
And a lot of them are requests year after year after year after year, and year after year after year, they get struck through and
So
eliminated.
anything that has a line bill was a request from staff that the budget committee and all directors were present, considered and recommended to them.
Okay.
So before we go any further, I think maybe it'd be a good time for Kevin to talk about how we arrived at that $1.5 million in salary increases.
All right, the packet I gave you, we're going to start out with the sheet that's on top, and I'll give you a little logic in what we did here. You know, the state is requiring a 5% average increase in order to be eligible for the compensation supplement that is listed here. Now, again, that 1.6 million includes the 5% they required this year that they're funding plus next year. So they have to fund this year's plus next year's, which is why it's higher. So we could theoretically refuse to give the 5% and then not receive the funding. So we started out with targeting at least the 5%. Another thing that has it's complicated salary administration so much, and will continue to do so, is the minimum wage requirements. Because on salary scales, a number of our lower paid positions have step 0 that's less than the minimum wage. So every time we have to raise that up to the minimum wage, it drives the scales all the way through and increases those. When we consolidated the 3 entities this year, in cases where we had to raise up to $12 an hour, which is the least we have on any salaries this year, we had to, we only increased the top of the scale by a fixed percentage. So people at the top got less than people at the bottom. And then trying to bring everybody over with all the different numbers of steps, different amounts from the 3 different entities to get them together was, as you well know, a major task. So we got that through. So we're trying to target what are we going to do for salaries in the 5% salary range. And one of the things that we agreed would be nice if we could do it, so this was the first step we took, is to have every position have the same percentage gain between each step. So whether you're a teacher, you're a custodian, you're a food service worker, the percentage gain between each step is consistent. Well, if you look at the sheet you have before you, in this section is fiscal year 2023, our current year. And if you look at each position classification and you look at the percentage gain per step, look at the variation between those. They range from 1.07 to 2.31. They're all over the chart.
And that was primarily because we consolidated 3 different salary.
Well, that was part of it, and plus those
Scales
disparities
from
that
last
existed
year, right.
before too. So they've been around for a while. The occupational therapist has not had a salary scale. We felt it was time that it did, especially since we've increased the numbers of persons in that category. So our first step was to, again, provide the same percentage gain between the steps. We have selected 1.39% because that's what the teachers are at. So that was the good target to shoot for. They're the backbone of the division, so to speak, as far as instructing our kids. So we developed every scale. And what I'm showing you today is just full-time, and I'm not worrying about, at this point, part-time or anything. This is just for illustration purposes. As a recap, the big tool we shared with the budget committee that Jonathan and Marie saw was you'd go blind trying to sort through that thing. But this is a consolidation of that information. And then you'll see, you'll see step 1, whatever it is, step 0, whatever it is this year, and the equivalent hourly rate, which is just that amount divided by the annual hours, which for teachers is like 7.67 hours per day times 200 days. That's, and then you have 210-day teachers, 220, 260. And then what the top of the scale amount is for the current fiscal year and what that equates to in dollar terms. So once we did the equalization of the percentage gain and realized that wasn't as costly as we were afraid it might be, then the next step in the process was to increase the scales after we've done that equalization by 3.61%. So step 0 go up 3.61%, and once you establish that amount, then it would drive through using the 1.39% to whatever the top of the scale was going to be.
And the 3.61 and 1.39 equates to 5.
Thank you. That's where the 3.61 came from, versus that plus the percentage gain. And so, so we did that, and there were a few tweaks where we would actually have to raise the step 0 a little bit higher or a little bit lower, so it all transpired through the 30 steps of the scale, but it went smoothly. Then our third step in the process, and we'd had a request from a director to increase the, so we had no one making $16, less than $16 an hour. We knew that was going to be a challenge, and I'm going to address that kind of sort of here in a minute. But we wanted to, and we know the minimum wage is going to $13.50 effective January 1st, 2025. So we thought it'd be nice if we could adjust those scales now and get a step closer to that to lessen the burden later on. And again, we'll review that here in a minute. So we did that, and so we adjusted those positions accordingly. And so you'll notice here, if you look at custodian, maintenance, we have 3 levels of maintenance personnel. We have maintenance, which is just a general unskilled position. We don't have anyone in that category currently. They're paid on the same rate as custodians. Then you have skilled maintenance. Then you have maintenance journeyman. And so you'll notice on this sheet and on the second page that custodian, maintenance, and food service worker all have the same $13 step 0, $19.69 step 30. Although their amounts, their total annual salaries are different because they work different numbers of hours. But their basis for their hourly rate is the same.
Same as teacher assistants.
And yes, thank you, and same for teacher assistants. And but again, the amounts they get paid vary, but based on the hours per year they work. So we made those adjustments, and when we had done all that and averaged it out, and this is back in November, we've had some personnel changes since then, would adjust it slightly, but to go back and redo that on top of everything Becky's doing is just not going to happen. But it resulted in 5.81% average increase. And to that, in our budget tool, we apply that percentage to positions that are not on a scale, like bus drivers and bus attendants, so they would get to 5.81%. Some people are going to fare better than others, as usual. You know, last year our custodians and some of our other positions did not fare as well as to some of the teacher positions that we've migrated and some of the administrative assistants, secretaries. This year, as a result of equalizing the steps, the percentage gains between the steps, and starting step 0 out at $13, they're going to come out pretty good next year. The other thing we did, due to the challenge of food service and Deborah Buckner trying to hire people to be cafeteria site managers, food service site managers, there's in the past, and this was a throwback to Alleghany, and it's been a hodgepodge effort over the years, and I could give you a long history on how that was done years ago, and not food service workers were treated differently than the regular employees because they were paid out of an enterprise fund. Now they're treated like everyone else, as they should be and have been for a while. But you'll notice, if you look on the second page right now, you'll notice the food service worker is making the same thing on an hourly rate as the small site manager. Even though they have some limited responsibilities, the difference in the dollar amount is they work a longer day. They work 7 hours a day versus 6.5. So there's not much incentive to take that job. So we've created a more reasonable incentive for the site managers, and as you'll see on the next year proposed, this food service worker would be at 13. The small site manager, which is 3 or less employees total, would be 14, and 15, and 16. So there's a sizable gain between each one of those positions, both at step 0 and at the top, to recognize that they do have some extra duties and to incent people to want to take the job. So that's where we are all on that. So any questions thus far I can answer for you?
I have a question.
Okay.
With us increasing salaries by 1.5 million and us having an increase in the budget of 1 million, which is a little over $400,000, how's that going to affect us with us losing?
We're going to have to cut some money somewhere. And once I get through this, Becky will get back to that. For example, not filling my position is going to generate a significant outcome. Is the instructional leadership and the superintendent work through the migration of employees to different schools as the school closed, there will be some potential gains of positions that can be not filled and eliminated. That would fall to the savings.
See the reductions on that sheet, we're on the last page, or 1.2.
Yeah, and we'll get.
I see, okay.
Yeah.
Was that half true salary cap?
It was, according to some people. It's a lot less than you'll have to pay me if I ever come back and help anything else do, I can tell you that.
That's the saving.
It's, so we feel good about what we put together. Again, it would be an average of 5.81%, and that's all positions included. And that is part-time and full-time and food service, although I did not address part-time here because they're not that great a number, and it would muddy the water in the comparison. But they would have the same scenario of a $13 minimum and 1.39% increase between the steps. So once we did that, and again, this goes back to the minimum wage impact. When we, by adjusting this to the same gain between steps for all employees, that makes giving salaries easier, especially in times where you're not going to give a percentage increase and only a step. Well, everybody's getting 1.39% just on a step.
Well, it makes it easier too, as the state, as in the past, for about the last 5 years, they used to do this, they'll say, you must give a 5%, or you must give a 5%. Well, then you can just apply that to the top of the scale, and it filters down. It just makes the whole process easier when the percentage gain between steps for all positions is the same, rather than, we had significant variation, as you can see from that first, we had significant variation between positions.
But the minimum wage is still something that hangs over us, and every time we comply, the impact on wages is significant, and it creates the problem of wage compression. So if you have, and I'll get to that in a second, but if you have a position grouping like maintenance, skilled maintenance, and maintenance journeyman, and the maintenance positions based on a basis of less than $13 an hour, and you're jacking them up to 13, but the skilled maintenance or the maintenance journeyman are already past that. You're not adjusting them up, but the gap between the two has narrowed. So then you have compression issues, and we've not even tried to address that at this point. The moral of the story is I do recommend highly that at some point the school division engage a firm to do a full-fledged salary and benefit analysis. They have the database to compare it to. They have the capacity to do that, because we're trying to do this on top of everything else. And they, quite frankly, see how other places do it and have that perspective. So, one of the things you may find that maybe we could be more competitive in salary, but when you look at what our health insurance and what people pay for that kind of makes up the difference, But at some point, I strongly urge you to consider doing that sooner rather than later. Okay, so, and I've got some notes at the bottom for clarification, because I know you'll have questions eventually, and hopefully that'll help answer some of them. But
Did we give anything to bus drivers?
yeah, they get to 5.81%. Anybody not on a scale gets 5.81%. The second page was just to give you just a quick glance at the wage compression issue. And so you've got the different, the same position classification, what the current gain between step is, et cetera, et cetera. And then you see in red position grouping salary gap. And that's just comparing the percentage difference between, and let's use the case of teachers, you see the first 5% in red. Is the gain between a 210-day teacher and a 200-day teacher. And the second one is the gain, the 4.76 is between a 220-day teacher and a 210-day teacher, and so on. The teacher 260 days is highlighted in yellow, because if you'll notice, their hourly rate in terms of their salary divided by their annual hours is actually lower than the other positions, and there is a reason for that. This is a carryover from Alleghany County, because Covington didn't have 260-day positions. 260-day teachers, and we have a handful that fall into that classification, they receive annual leave. None of the others do. So they're going to get 15 to 23 annual leave days a year based on however paid leave based on their years of service, whereas these others do not. So historically, their hourly rate was diluted to reflect that fact. So rightly or wrongly, that's been done that way for years. So if you look at, let's drop down to the maintenance category, this third positional grouping, and look at the gains, 2.6, 20.9, 14.81 at step 0, then 15.3, 12.43, 8.6 at step 30. Then look what it would be next year under the FY24 proposed. The gains are consistent regardless of step 0 or step 30 because of the 1.39%. So that's a positive outcome. And you'll see a couple other jobs there'll be a few little fractional percent variances based on, the salary scale formulas have like a 4 decimal places, so rounding will count sometimes for things. But if you look at the journeyman maintenance, the gap between the journeyman maintenance and the skilled maintenance currently is 20.29% at step 0. Next year it'll only be 12.43. But their step 30 stays consistent. So you've got some gains and some losses, and at some point in time, especially as going forward, when that step 0 continues to be raised and compressing wages, that's going to have to be addressed. Or it'll be, especially like when the school secretary is making 10 cents less than administrative assistant, what's the incentive to come over here and do what they do for 10 cents, And that's not belittling the school secretary's job, because they got enough on their plate too. But anyway, that was just a little snapshot of the positive outcomes. One of them of the 1.39% across all positions, but also the compression issue. Some are okay. And remember, when you look at the food service site managers compared, they're all faring well regardless of step 30 or step 0, but that's because we created that gain between for each one. So that's that. I'm coming down the home stretch, and I'll finish boring you to tears. But